Italy banned an island. Not because it's crumbling, because of what happens to people who go there. Just across the Venetian lagoon lies Poveglia, a patch of land smaller than a football field, yet holding more bodies than some wars. Locals call it cursed. Historians call it graveyard. And officials? They pretend it doesn't exist. For decades, no ferries dock, no tours run, and no development permits are approved. Tourists walking the canals of Venice have no idea that just a short boat ride away, there's an island you are legally forbidden to set foot on, which leaves one question hanging over every silent wave. What secret is so terrible that a government would rather erase it than explain it? To understand why Italy won't let anyone near Poveglia today, you have to go back to when Venice stopped being romantic and became a graveyard. Venice has used Poveglia as a plague dumping ground since the 14th century. But in 1576, during the deadliest outbreak, the island became hell on earth. Parish records show that 217 bodies were shipped to Poveglia every single day. For 8 months straight. That's over 50,000 corpses in less than a year. More than most medieval wars. This wasn't just burial. Some were placed in mass pits. Others burned in pyres whose smoke choked the horizon. The soil itself is a mix of volcanic ash, sand, and centuries of decomposed bodies. Locals report that in quiet afternoons, the ground seems oddly warm in spots, as if something beneath is still burning. Fishermen whisper that sometimes nets come up heavy, snagged on bone fragments too small to identify. Others say the air itself feels thick near shore, like walking through someone else's nightmare. In 1957, a construction crew was hired to clear debris for a planned resort. They lasted 3 days. Official reports say they quit over structural concerns. Crew members later admitted they refused to dig anymore. Every shovelful brought up teeth. Scientists call this place memory, trauma imprinting on the environment. Poveglia is like a living archive of every scream, every fevered gasp, every desperate plea from the plague years. And one of those voices, one that never stops screaming, we'll meet in a moment when the asylum opens its doors. Venice's canals are picturesque. Poveglia is not. Bone fragments still wash ashore after storms. Jagged, yellowed, impossible to ignore. Marco hasn't fished these waters since 1987. I pulled up a femur that year, he says. Still had fabric wrapped around it. Looked like a doctor's coat. In 2003, environmental scientists tested the air around Poveglia. They were investigating reports of a persistent metallic smell, like iron left in rain or blood dried and re-wetted. The test found nothing. No elevated metals. No unusual compounds. Yet every single person who visits the island describes the exact same smell. Satellite imagery from 2016 revealed another anomaly. Unexplained heat signatures appearing on the island's north shore between 2 and 4 a.m. No structures. No human activity. Just concentrated warmth in patterns that don't match geological features. The Italian Coast Guard investigated once. Their report is sealed. A few urban explorers have made it across, usually at night, via kayak. Most post their footage online, then delete it within days. One told a journalist in 2019, I felt watched the entire time. Not by police, by the island itself. He was hospitalized 3 days later with symptoms doctors couldn't explain. Severe dehydration, bruising in patterns that looked like finger marks, and temporary memory loss. Lucia, who fishes the outer lagoon, stopped bringing her dog after 2012. He'd go rigid before we even saw the island, she says. Wouldn't move, wouldn't bark, just stared at something I couldn't see. When I forced him closer, he bit me. First time in 10 years he'd ever snapped. She still has the scar. The bones, the smell, the heat, all of it could be explained separately. But together, they form a pattern. Poveglia doesn't want to be forgotten. And here's what makes it worse. The plague victims weren't the last to die here. In 1922, someone made a decision that would seal the island's fate forever. They built an asylum, on a graveyard, and the doctor who ran it, well, his screams never stopped either. In 1922, Venice built an asylum on Poveglia, on top of 50,000 plague corpses. The official reason? Isolated location ideal for treatment. The real reason? Hiding people society didn't want to see. Patient testimonies describe a doctor who conducted experiments on the upper floors. He drilled into skulls without anesthesia. He called it therapy. Survivors described screams that lasted all night, echoing through corridors built on bones. Fragments from hospital logs in the 1930s mention psychosurgical trials and cranial intervention success rates. Sterile language for brutal lobotomies. In 1946, hospital records note the doctor's death as an accidental fall from the bell tower. But staff interviews declassified in 1972 tell a different story. He'd been seen wandering the upper floors for weeks, muttering about figures in the walls. On his last night, 3 nurses heard him scream. Not when he fell, but before. He hit the ground still conscious. Witnesses say the screaming continued until the fog rolled in. The asylum closed in 1968. Windows were bricked up, doors welded shut. But explorers who've made it inside describe the same scene. Rusted gurneys, chains still bolted to walls, surgical tools scattered across the floor. And always, the bell tower. Its bell was removed decades ago, yet visitors swear they hear a toll. Usually at night, when the lagoon is dead silent. What makes this worse isn't the folklore, but the consistency. Fishermen, explorers, locals, they all describe the same sounds, the same shapes in the fog. You'd expect exaggeration. Instead, you get eerie agreement. Then came 2007. Italian authorities commissioned a structural survey before considering demolition. The engineer who entered the tower lasted 40 minutes before radioing for extraction. His report, obtained through FOIA in 2015, contains one line that was never explained. Recommend immediate quarantine. This is not a structural issue. The demolition was canceled. No further surveys were attempted. The plague victims weren't the last to die here. But here's what no one talks about. The asylum closed in 1968. The last patient was transferred out. The doors were sealed. So why, in 2014, did an investor walk into that building and walk out refusing to ever speak about what he found? Italy put Poveglia up for a 99-year lease in 2014. The highest bidder was Luigi Brugnero, a Venice businessman who offered €513,000 and promised a multi-million-euro restoration plan. The auction made international headlines. A prized island on paper, a plague graveyard in practice. But the sale never finalized. State officials judged the winning offer incongruous with redevelopment conditions. The concession did not proceed. Local civic groups, organized as Poveglia per Tutti, fought to keep the island public. Legal challenges followed. The simple fact, a high-profile bid, a promise of investment, and then nothing. Not because no one wanted the island, because the state refused to finalize the deal. That gap is where documented fact meets local testimony. Dock workers reported seeing equipment unloaded, then abandoned. Bloggers claimed crews left abruptly. Permits for access were repeatedly denied. These accounts vary in detail, but they share a pattern. People who try to work on the island didn't stay long. Citizens and associations kept pressing for transparency. Court rulings found procedural failings in how the state agency handled concessions. Activists pushed to force documents into the open. In 2021, the government approved €200,000 for structural repairs to the asylum building. Repairs no contractor has publicly claimed, for a site no one is allowed to visit. The island wasn't simply abandoned. It was litigated over, fought for, and repeatedly closed off. What we have is this: a public auction that collapsed, court records showing procedural failures, and a decade of denied permits. No leaked documents explain why, but the pattern is clear. Someone decided Poveglia stays closed. Poveglia's past is documented horror, but it's the present that doesn't make sense. Why block development? Why seal court documents? Why spend €200,000 on repairs to a building no one can visit? The island isn't just abandoned. It's being actively maintained as off-limits. That's not neglect. That's policy. The island's paperwork tells one story, but some modern visitors tell another. Next, we move inside. What happened when people ignored the signs and walked through the asylum doors? So after centuries of plague pits, a century of asylum abuse, and decades of government silence, we arrive at the real question: why is Poveglia still sealed? Let's strip away the easy answers. Structural danger? Yes, the buildings are crumbling. But in 2021, the ministry approved 200,000 euros in stabilization work. If it's too unsafe for tourists, why send construction crews? Environmental contamination? In 2016, soil tests were conducted. Their results were immediately classified, sealed until 2066. That is not standard practice for asbestos or lead. Across Italy, those records are usually public. Something triggered an unusual level of secrecy. But what? Tourism management? In a court filing, the government argued that releasing records about Poveglia could cause economic harm to Venice's tourism sector. That's not safety. That's reputation. Protecting visitors from an island is one thing. Protecting Venice's image from its history is another. Here's what we can verify. The land holds more than 50,000 human remains. The soil is unstable, possibly toxic. The buildings are in danger of collapse. Each of these is a real, rational reason to restrict access. But none explain why the 2014 developer quit overnight. Why equipment was left rusting in place. Why multiple permit applications are rejected with no explanation. And none explain the locals. The fishermen who refused those waters, the dog that wouldn't step on shore, the Coast Guard survey in 2007 that ended with a note. This is not a structural issue. So what's left? Maybe contamination no one wants to acknowledge. Maybe liability Italy cannot afford. Maybe bureaucratic paralysis. It's easier to lock the gates than fix the problem. Or maybe something happened there in living memory that officials decided should never be public. Not supernatural, just too ugly for release. The truth is probably mundane. But mundane doesn't explain silence. And until those 2016 soil reports are unsealed, until someone decides transparency matters more than secrecy, Poveglia will remain what it has always been, an island where the dead outnumber the living, and the secrets outnumber them both.